Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining. This is Crypto Gordon Freeman, and you are listening to the Club 21M podcast. I'm your host, Crypto Gordon Freeman. I'm proud to say that this is our 5th episode of the Club 21M podcast. And today's episode is an important topic for important reasons. And as you will hear me say many times over and over, this podcast is about capturing these brief moments in history, because everything we're living through is absolutely historical. We are living in quite amazing times, unprecedented times. So today's episode is about stablecoins and the attacks against and trying to correct some things that are improperly represented. Now, I can say from the inside view, for years and years and years, I believe that people like myself, our perspective is a very important thing on this topic. And it will largely be regulators and decision makers and academics outside of the span and sphere of real world use who are largely going to weigh in as if they are the experts, and they are not. So history as their tool, here's the one main takeaway that I want you to get. You learn to rewire your brain to seek out the truth underlying true things that you hear people say. When everything is politicized, nothing is true. That is the most important thing for you to get from this takeaway. And this is not some vastly wild outlying opinion piece about politics. I didn't say as a conservative, I believe that. I didn't say as a moderate, I believe that. I didn't say as a libertarian, I believe that. I didn't say as a Democrat, leftist, or progressive, or socialist that I believe that. I said that when things become highly politicized, nothing that is said is true. What does that mean? Any truth, first of all, is handpicked, it's selective, and there's an underlying end means involved. Now, that's not only true in politics. Of course, if somebody is writing a paper or has any kind of agenda, if it is a runaway capitalism agenda, if it is a get-rich-quick scheme agenda, if it is I want to sell you gold or silver agenda, everything tends to have one. But right now we're talking about legislature, we're talking about regulations, we're talking about state by state, country by country, end-to-end regulations that affect everyone. So now that you understand, we're going to be talking about stablecoins. We're going to be talking about the political implications of the things that are going on and the most recent launch against our freedoms. And you're going to see, I hope, that Gordon knows a little bit about what he's talking about. So before I go further, please like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell for notifications. Of these, it is very important that if you get anything from this at all, please share it with others. You are my network and my means to get more people listening. Thank you for that. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Archangel Alts, AAA. So to the same degree that this episode is not an all-inclusive introduction to stablecoins, and I've placed myself in the position to where now I need to do that episode, so that'll be coming soon. But this is talking about our time in history. And in our time in history, this is more about my explanation of a thought process, a perspective, a point of view. And I hope that you will find that it helps to guide you to do your own research, go and look at things that are important to you. So stablecoins, first of all, just a very simple definition. Like I said, I'm going to put another podcast just towards the topic. But just for your understanding, stablecoins, essentially, if you think of it as an item that is a cryptocurrency that is pegged to the value of a fiat currency or a legal tender from a specific place. Obviously, since markets are still based around a dollar standard, which is no longer based around a standard to anything else, which is part of the problem that we're facing here. Most stablecoins mean they are cryptocurrency that represents a dollar. Okay, so they would be useless, they would have zero value, and they would also have been under legal and political scrutiny much quicker in the game if they were empty vessels of value that could not be transferred anywhere outside of crypto. Meaning that, let's say that somebody wanted to issue a stablecoin and they had no dollar reserves at all. And even worse than that, they had no other liquid assets that would be classified as being worth dollars. Let's say that somebody wanted to issue a stablecoin, but they had $10 million in silver because that's really their thing. Well, they'd have to be able to shed that silver in order for you to be able to redeem those imaginary dollars, supposedly. Now, somebody could structure it to where they have assets in other currencies, meaning especially if you think about somebody who is an entity that is an exchange, and everybody is allowed to load and unload items like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin that are very common, then somebody could issue a stablecoin, and let's say that they make it a stablecoin that can only be used on that platform, and they say, okay, turn in $1,000 of your Bitcoin minus a 1% fee, and you now have $1,000 in exchange coin worth $1 each. So they're equating that to Bitcoin, and the idea is that now you can trade the value of Bitcoin. Technically, you could end up with more value in that platform's stablecoins that if you wanted to, you could cash out. But they could make it to where the only way that you could cash out is to exchange it once more for one of the coins that they allow you to remove. This is something that economically could create a scarcity in one coin versus another, and it could actually be more complex than it would be worth. But I just want to give you an idea. There are coins that are in a category that I would call platform coins because they're issued by, let's say, Binance, a popular exchange, or Crypto.com has a coin that is for their platform only. Eventually, these become popular and they become listed, and they can be transferred to other, or at least bought and sold on other exchanges. But they're designed because they serve a specific purpose for that exchange. For example, on Binance, they have a BNB coin, and it was originally issued mainly for the purpose, not that it wasn't designed to gain in value, because it was, but designed so that you could buy Binance coins in order to lower the cost of fees for trading on Binance. And most other exchanges outside of the US, and maybe some inside, have started issuing their own according to this idea as well. Ironically, when Bitcoin started going radically up in value, these coins also went way up in value as well. So it's kind of funny because in a sense, you have coins like Binance coin that you could buy $100 of them and they were worth $7, $8, $9. And then when you really need the bulk of them the most for more trading, buying and selling, or higher values of buying and selling, they were worth as much as $400 or $500. Maybe more. I haven't checked on the price recently. They've come down to about $300 now. But you can imagine that if you needed to buy, let's say that you needed to buy 1,000 BNB coins in order to reduce your fees to the next tier level, like to cut your fees in half. It was a lot easier to buy 1,000 BNB for, let's say, $8,000. And if it goes up to 300, now you basically have nobody that could buy that many. So people would absolutely be locked into different things. So stable coins are issued by companies that are in the cryptocurrency sphere. They are cryptocurrencies, but they are not designed to go up or down in value. They're designed to be pegged at 1 = 1 for $1, which means that they should have collateral backed in dollars or something, things that allow them to be liquid as necessary. So these are items like Tether USDT, USDC, several others. Tether is the largest, the biggest, and the one that is really in the crosshairs, and really for no particularly good reason. There has been a stain on Tether for many years about whether they could produce the documentation to show that they had one-for-one collateral. Years ago, though they were not legally bound to do so, people were naturally skeptical of Tether, and they even falsely represented the economics underlying stablecoins because it was very new in crypto, thinking that it was a scam that was offsetting the value of Bitcoin, not understanding the flow of reserves and understanding that simply buying and selling more Bitcoin to the dollar, if you make that more liquid and make more of it available, then you're going to see more price fluctuation in Bitcoin because people can do more of the things with it that they wish to. So, to the same degree that people could say, there's a scam going on here, they're allowing selling pressure against the dollar to affect Bitcoin. The exact same thing could be said that it could also make it to where the onloading, offloading, deposit withdrawal of Bitcoin becomes quicker and easier because it's easier for them to go from a dollar to a stablecoin dollar and move very briskly, very quickly on exchanges. And even make their transfers and decisions on one exchange and move it completely to another. Let's say that somebody has one bank account open and connected to one exchange. But once they're in dollars and crypto, technically they could move their dollars over to anywhere else in the world that they can get on an exchange with or without having to share all their customer information or their KYC, know your customer, which means documentations. So this gives you an idea of stablecoins. They're cryptocurrencies. They are backed by usually dollars, but they can be backed by anything else. It just becomes exceedingly less popular as it goes along. The largest ones are Tether dollars. And the scrutiny against them for years has been, prove that you have a backing, and therefore they have. And that silenced people for about a day. They have run into some issues over time, and this has caused them to immediately update their disclosures and policies just to state that everything is either backed by a one-to-one on dollars or equal to assets, meaning that they might have other things that are worth, in addition to dollars, they also have other assets that are dollar equivalent. And that could be a number of different things. They provide a daily report of disclosure about what those items are and how much they are. There has never been a run on the banks in imaginary dollars in stablecoins. And as long as these are being used to the tens of millions of dollars as opposed to hundreds of thousands of dollars, the likelihood that there is ever a run on the banks or people rushing to either cash out of their stablecoins or transfer them over to something else, the likelihood is only going to come from the government's trying to scare. So I want to be the one that's on record to exclaim how wrong their approach to this is. It's not right. The real world equivalents in banking are being proven to be obsolete. And I can only imagine that the government issued stablecoins, being Fed coins, CBDCs called central bank digital currencies, they're being rolled out from every country that is significant to the economy, starting with the digital yuan from China. We are in talks now. EU is in talks now. All of the Central American and South American countries are moving a little bit quicker, which might make one speculate as to the regional reasons for the order of events. But all this to say that what we are actually seeing, the bottom line, is that stablecoins are under fire because countries are going to issue their own stablecoins backed by central banks, CBDCs. And at first, they will not be required by citizens to use instead of the cash they are used to that they recognize. But over time, it is this, in quotes, underlying blockchain technology that they embrace, that they are looking at use case patents from banks. Even places like JP Morgan have been doing patents. Microsoft has been doing patents. A lot of different companies are secretly running their own patents, while publicly, up until last year, they have been very anti-crypto, very hypocritical, not even what they truly believe. So without going into each paper and each reform and each bill and each committee, a lot has been happening. Specifically in the US, there is this rhetoric from the left mostly, but some bipartisan. The threat to the Fed is essentially what we're talking about. And they're talking about, runaway banking and, the free banking. We're talking about turn of the century and earlier, where banks in particular were state only. They could not have national chains. And so issuing banknotes or things that were transferable were only good sometimes only within that branch of the bank and sometimes only within that state. It was the fact that regulation limited states to not having national exposure to their notes that you had the problem of issuance not being recognized from place to place, which also means that the price and value can have massive amounts of slippage, which is not fair to people traveling inside the country. So eventually the desire to have central banking and to have the reserves backed by something, let's say gold, let's say, hey, I have an idea, let's make it nothing. But the centralization of banks had some merit, but was also done for very selfish purposes by the bankers themselves. The famous Creature from Jekyll Island tells the story of the passing of the 1913 Act taking place December 23rd, where they knew that any opposition to the Federal Reserve Act would not be present. If you'd like to learn for yourself a little bit more about this period in history, just put in Google, put in 1913 Federal Reserve Act, and you'll learn everything that you want to know. So here's where we come back to my takeaway that I gave you right at the front, which is when it's political, it's not true. We have selective history, where we talk about the free banking period where standards were needed, were not employed, and thus there were inconsistency and there was unfairness in the banking, where you didn't have one-to-one value from state to state. And often the way that banknotes could fluctuate were not a trustworthy value. In fact, there were banks that were going out of business, and then you might have notes that were useless. So part of what is being left out of the story is it was actually the federal regulation not allowing a bank, let's say if they were doing things correctly, not just a privately run entity that was incapable of backing what they were selling, providing a true banking confidence with customers. What was really taking place was at the federal level, they couldn't get what they needed from a centralized authority or presence to simply say that there was some kind of backing to this, or that they could get a license that went from state to state, thus allowing people to have confidence that their money would be recognized wherever they traveled within the country. That part is left out. The reasons that there was the Wild West of banking and banks came and went is not so much that there was just a hotbed of corruption and unlicensed, unregulated nonsense going on in banking. The next thing that is a partial truth, you can go and look through history and see that all these different things that show up in reports and are being proposed as a threat from stablecoins, they are rooted in history, but they are partial truths in order to give reason to a crackdown on stablecoins. Another partial truth of history, sometimes a lie is told by omission. In this case, the omission is that during that same point in time, there were completely successful versions of what they would call free banking taking place that should be included in the dialogue. If you're going to say, here's the comparison concern we have with stablecoins is just this runaway economy where there are no standards and there's, no guarantee of liquidity and all this kind of stuff, then you need to cite that accurately, because you're coming against something that's been there for years and years and years. And many, if not most of these coins have already jumped through the hoops to be regulated. And that's a third source of misinformation. Actually, before I go on to cite examples that were successful in the free banking historical dialogue, I do also want to point out the fact that stablecoins are designed digitally to be stable, meaning that they're pegged to $1. They're meant to stay at $1, no matter what happens with the volume up or down, the amount of buying and selling. They stay at $1, and they stay at that within a fraction of a penny. It takes radical changes for them to go up or down by even a penny. And technically, somebody could take advantage of any inconsistencies between various stablecoins and run arbitrage and actually earn some kind of profit just by trading those tiny micro changes. Are these bad things when means to profit offer extra liquidity and value to a market? I don't think so. But another criticism is that it creates inaccuracies and instabilities. So attacks from the Fed have been that stablecoins are essentially creating a drift towards non-uniformity. And I would disagree 100% with that. There is no evidence that that is a problem. Now, that is one of the wider criticisms that these lawmakers are making, is that these can be wildly thrown off what they're pegged to. And what you would look towards is a use case. Let's say that stablecoins came out last month and nobody regulated them. And so the regulators want to come in and say, hey, we haven't studied this thing. What if they lose their pegging? Then people are going to have all these different inconsistencies and it's going to drive the value of something in the wrong direction. Well, that I could understand. But we're talking about things that have been around for years and years and years and years and years. And they're used in the US. They're used on centralized and decentralized exchanges. They are sent back and forth from the US to Singapore and all over the world. Why suddenly come in now with such concerns? The recent under fire has happened because just in the past couple of months, that liquidity has finally come into play in a much larger role, and the value of stablecoins have gone up 3x. And PayPal, for instance, has gone up 2%. This is not volume. This is the actual value of currency held in stablecoins. In the $30 billion range, where accounts in PayPal have been $35-36 billion. Maybe they went up from 35 to 39 billion, somewhere in that range. You have somewhere in the range of $30 billion in stablecoins to $120 billion in stablecoins. This is not daily volume. This is the actual buying and holding value in, which means that it's leaving the dollar going towards something else. The thing is that it's up to Tether and these other companies that issue the cryptocurrencies to have the backing that allows people to buy back into their dollars. And they do. They're regulated to do so, which means a dollar equals a dollar, and digitally is their responsibility to keep that happening. If they didn't, guess what people would do? They would sell them and use something else. Since we're looking at stablecoins as representing a dollar, once they enter the tokenized version, they are essentially IOUs that they can be redeemable back and converted back to dollars. You don't hear about anybody, and we're talking about millions and millions of people who communicate on Reddit, on social media, in Telegram groups. You don't hear people saying, I can't get out of my digital dollar, or their stable coins. If it has happened, it is something that the majority of us who do this 24/7 are oblivious to. It's going to happen if the governments create the scare to make it happen. And that's where it concerns me that the next layer of news, and thus history to draw from, is going to be regulators were trying to avoid this terrible thing from happening, this lack of liquidity in highly unregulated stablecoins that are 100% regulated. Okay. They will create the scare. There will be a run. Some people will not be as liquid as others, depending on who gets there first. And there will be a temporary freeze on depositing or withdrawing these funds, or a halt on the exchanges of using them. And then you'll have your self-fulfilling prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy is probably the most common thing that you'll see me pointing to, because it is so rampantly relative to trading crypto. And by trading crypto, I mean investing in, buying it, eventually holding it or selling it. So another thing to point out is that in the free banking, banks issuing notes, they were backed by gold, not by dollars. And stablecoins are backed by dollars to guarantee a 1-for-1. The only issue that you could have with that is whether they are assets held instead of dollars. Tether is the one that we point to for that. And that's why they're issuing a report to say what percentage of these things exist. What I find highly hypocritical is today we don't have a gold backing of any sort, especially for our fiat standard, the legal tender for the United States. And they are allowing a fractional reserve that historically people that pay attention to this and are concerned about the value of our dollar that is depreciating at record pace, is that because it's not pegged to something else of value, that the more that is printed, the less valuable it becomes, and banks are able to borrow against the promissory aspect of lending in order to only actually hold a tiny fraction. It used to be 10%. It's much less than even 10% at this point. It may be 1 to 3% of dollars that are actually held, that if there was a run on the banks, you would find that there would be an immediate clamp down on how much money people could take out. So this promissory note lending aspect and borrowing aspect with banks holding your dollars is so incredibly hypocritical coming from the Fed level to suggest that the assets are not there to guarantee the stable coins. If they're not there in some form or another, then you can withdraw their regulatory approval, or you can require them to return to that standard within a certain time. But creating the dialogue of a scare in a world where people do not understand crypto entirely, especially stable coins, it's irresponsible, it's dishonest. So part of what we see here is that the history that's not being told, free banking, yes, it did put the responsibility of improving and restoring assets to collateral-based value on private enterprise. But I disagree with the representation that it was outside of regulation. It was actually the regulation of the banks, I believe, that caused the problem. They were limited in where they could take deposits. They were limited in where those deposits could be recognized. And they also had to deal with things like government bonds, which the government was the double-edged sword problem. Maybe they weren't providing the value that something like a gold standard could provide. Maybe it was the value in these things or the instability in these things that helped lead to the demise of the banks. The next point is that historically, this is using a United States-centric problem as a sweeping example for stablecoins which are not held to a specific locale property. They shouldn't be. The whole point is that they are so liquid, they can be bought and sold, sent anywhere, instantly. So in the case of Scotland, Sweden, Canada, Switzerland, the free banking was a proven success. And now we have, for years and years and years, Pax from Paxos, USDC, Tether USDT, Trustcoin TUSD, many others have been doing exactly what they're designed to do, and in a regulatory framework that's been working. Nobody using them is complaining. So what history actually does teach us, and the politicians who are using fear as yet again another grasp for control, they will not tell you, is that in Scotland, in Switzerland, in Canada, in Sweden, the issuance of banknotes were very successful, did not lead towards the closing of banks and people losing their value in these notes because they were not limited in regulation to being able to open up to depositors everywhere, and they were not forced to hold assets that were risky. It was the free market options of how these banks could run that they could choose to run to their best self-interests, which happened to align with the same best interests of the customers. Now, that's not to say that they were run without any kind of regulation at all. They weren't banks that were allowed to open and then scam people. What they were was they were not limited in the type of economic function that helps them to thrive and thus be stable. So this is something I'm very passionate about because I hate revisionist history and the implications of the pull for control. Next, something that people must understand is the difference between a digital dollar or a CBDC and a stablecoin. The reason that is being given for the necessity for a digital dollar that will stamp out the stablecoin. First of all, if you have a stablecoin and a CBDC, everybody is going to see that the stablecoin works better. Second of all, they are liquid and handle volume better for a reason. They settle immediately. The second that you go in or out of a stablecoin to something else, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or even back to a dollar, you're done. It's happened. It's been done digitally. The record is resolved. Now, the holder, let's say the exchange itself, they're responsible for how they're handling money, and they've got their own license to deal with how that stuff works. You, the customer, do not have the problem of becoming illiquid unless the government forces this through a scare. The greater concern, the greater importance is that it is not up to interpretation whether the CBDC is about surveillance, collecting data, and control. And something that I'm so concerned people don't understand is that right now we have central banks that issue and back money that flows from every other bank. The reason that it takes a long time for money to be approved and to get where it has to go is that it's not like it's just sitting in the local banks and can transfer back and forth between us and them. They have to go through the central banks for that money to be on record and digitally accounted for and approved. So banks don't do this for every single transaction. They do it every day. Money doesn't get approved intraday, coming and going back and forth between banks and their central authority banks. Sometimes that's why the difference between a wire, Fed wire, and ACH can be a day or two to 3 to 5 days. Usually 5 business days is what we assume, which is how a lot of these trading platforms, unfortunately, make a profit in the middle by recognizing money in your account that is not usable, which means that they're able to use it as collateral until it's available to you. Your money that is being issued to you. Because it takes long to be approved through the central bank, there's lots of things that could be done with that on paper value until it is approved. And that's not for us to enjoy, that's for them to enjoy. But this is not just a digitization of what we already have. Once the dollar goes digital, in whatever country you're from, your dollar goes digital, they now have the power of the surveillance over the cash with what you do with it from there. Now, if you put money in the bank, or if what you earn automatically goes into your bank deposit, and you pay all your bills from there, and you shop through PayPal online, through Amazon and other places, then technically, there, at least in the private market and some in the bank market, is a record of all your purchases. If you did something wrong that placed you under investigation, then they would be able to go and access where your money went. You still have the right to take out cash and to use it as you freely wish to. It's not only people that are trying to protect their privacy and decision-making who are trying to get away with something wrong that hold that ideal. What I mean to say is that people that like to operate in cash may like to do so for the purpose of freedom, for the purpose of free will, for the purpose of it's in my hand, it's instantly used, and this is the way I want to go about things. If you want to go and pay for gas with a card or pay for gas with cash, it's your choice. You choose how you wish to be liquid. With the CBDC, not only would they know everything about every purchase everywhere for eternity, because once you give the power away, you don't get it back, but they can also approve or disapprove. Now, that doesn't happen through central banking right now, because once money is released and recognized as yours, if it's legal where you are, you can use it. If you have put money into your bank account and it's there and everybody recognizes that it's there, you can go online and you can buy services, you can buy subscriptions, you can have your Netflix, your Amazon, your eBay, whatever you want to do with that is yours. Through a CBDC, it is directly, not indirectly through the banks, but directly on chain with the federal government. It is directly on chain with central banks. They automatically know everything that you're doing. So this is not about trying to protect people from extortionists. This is not about ransomware. This is not at all about spam mail schemes, fraud, hacks. This is not about money laundering. This is not about the drug lords. This is not about any of these scares that 99.9% of us using cryptocurrencies every day never worry about, come into contact with. There are plenty of scary things going on with cryptocurrencies that we do deal with every day. But the CBDC challenge to stablecoins doesn't affect any of them. Sometimes exchanges have been hacked. If it's a bad exchange, they handle it poorly. Most of them have great procedures in place to protect them. Where the federal government may not come in to protect them, they protect themselves with what's called cold wallets, meaning that the vast majority of funds that are protecting your account are not online at all. What is being traded from account to account on an exchange usually is not affected at all. Very rarely, every once in a while, the security measures of an exchange are susceptible to something they had not thought about or were just not well protected. And people do get into users' accounts, in which case we have recently, over the past couple of years, seen examples of exchanges handling the PR of such events amazingly well. I like to cite Bitrue, Bitrue, as handling things excellent. You know, we're so sorry this happened. We're jumping on top of it right away. If you saw any irregularity in your account, it is being made whole by us right now. You will be back where you were in 24 hours. We can't imagine how scary this must have been for you, etc., etc., etc. Did you get that kind of notice from your bank when they leaked your financial records, your social security, everything about your interaction with that account? Did you even know that they did? If you're with a major chain, you have been hacked. All of us have exposure to the loss of our name, address, phone number, social security, and even our banking transactions. So why isn't the Fed making that a top priority? Why does the stablecoin have to be 1-to-1 or else when the banks can be somewhere around 3%? At any given time, everybody could request their cash and they wouldn't get it. 3% would get it. The rest, there would be a clampdown because it is more scary for people to realize they don't have access to their money than for them to actually need it at any given time. I take great issue with the idea that we are in the wild, wild west of stablecoins and the vastly loose and invisible regulation is going to lead to a train wreck. The train wreck is coming because the governments want you to be forced to use their surveillance coins. Plain and simple. Now, I also take great issue with people within the cryptosphere, within the world of cryptocurrency, who are much smarter than I am and take an economist's brilliant genius approach to things. But they also have bought into the instability of stablecoins, the worries, the fears of stablecoins. Why are they issued the way they are? Why are they used the way they are? There is a traditional banking mindset that comes from traditional teaching and learning of traditional economics that for some reason is not translating to something that is better and more liquid. And we are in a transitional economy where the digitization of things is always met with resistance. But part of the problem that I have is in the past when, for example, the music industry was met with resistance and people realized how easy it would be to use Napster to rip a CD or take all the songs off of their CD that they bought, pump it online and share it with the world, and they couldn't be implicated without a great deal of surveillance to show that they were part of the Napster network. And eventually, some of the scare tactic clamped down because this is stealing and it's not allowed and pirating is not allowed. Some people were sought out to make examples of them. Napster eventually was made responsible. And then we deal with the same thing with Pirate Bay and all the other things that pop up. But it would be insincere to suggest that some of the same mentality there didn't go into the actual use and creation of blockchain. Blockchain absolutely is Napster for money. Let's be honest about it. The thing is that it is using the efficiencies with regulation end to end to make the technology work well for us, not against something like the music industry. But the music industry could have taken control of this and said, embrace digital. We're going to make instant CDs something that our customers can use. They fought tooth and nail to keep the slow distribution physical CD process pumping to stores that were losing money hand over fist and eventually closed. The distributors lost out. The record labels lost out. There were fewer people being signed to large labels. The distribution chain was vastly broken. They were dealing with a fraction of money. And then you had mp3.com, self-publishing of CDs, self-licensing of and playing music online. Online radio became more of a thing. People creating their own playlist for music became a real thing. Actually, with Real FM, I think was. And the format for online music, even though it sounded horrible. But it was Apple with iTunes that everybody laughed about. There's no way that in the Napster culture that people are going to latch on to paying for the songs or albums that they want. And when the first million downloads happened, people said, oh, okay, maybe they're onto something. Apple, in the Steve Jobs era, had a way of branding things in a way that made it intelligent and articulate to take part, and in a way that it made you feel like you were a part of the wrong side of a revolution if you didn't take part. Okay, the record labels could easily have made that choice themselves. What they did was they fought the underlying real revolution, which was the digitization of things. And instead, they fought we have our rights to what we have legally produced ourselves, and we have arranged the rights with the artists that these recordings represent, and you're not allowed to steal them. Well, that was the valued argument, but why not make a $13 CD available for $5 online and people could have it downloaded immediately and pay, let's say, $3 extra to have it shipped to them? That would have been smart. Then we worry about retail. Should there be retail? What should retail's position be? I think that possibly the downsizing to kiosks or to opening a section in larger format stores would have made sense. Now, most people today may not remember this or may not have been alive in the time of this going on, but CDs, DVDs, well, okay, DVDs weren't around yet, but CDs and VHS and all these things that you would buy in a record store were also available in big box stores. You could go to everywhere from Big Lots to Walmart to Target, and there was the music section or there was the movie section. And everything that I'm saying about the music industry is valid to the movie industry as well, to Hollywood, except for the fact that because movies are much bigger download and upload, and we didn't have as easy a format until DVD came along, there was a lag in when pirating became an online issue for movies like it is now. Fortunately for both of those industries, they realized that they have moved over to a licensing model for their main revenue. So you even though you still have the licensing side of things for publishing companies and the distribution chain ownership of copyright of physical matter, which is a very complex topic in and of itself, the flow of funds is now based on subscriptions and licenses. So what could be learned from that whole process? We have the same thing here, but this time, unfortunately, it's with money. So we're dealing directly with the government instead of companies and corporations. In this case, the entity that regulates all the stores is the one that is challenged, and they are not keeping up with the times. But they're going to be forced to the front to issue CBDCs. And this should actually create efficiencies in getting your money from your bank account to your exchange account where it can be traded. And they should actually offer federal level protection of your money, meaning if there is a hack or something stolen, that now you're doubly protected. That's not going to happen. They're not going to put themselves on the line for what they are branding as risky behavior. And why I say branding as is because it's yet again an example of rules for thee, not for me, where they are holding back the limits on institutional trading, on being able to trade funds, like Grayscale's GBDC, where you have exposure to Bitcoin without having to go out there and buy it yourself. Shares in companies that are cryptocurrency-based companies, mining companies, companies like MicroStrategy that have grown so much and in awareness have grown because of their backing their assets and what they perceive as digital gold or a better store of value than gold. You can take confidence in a company like MicroStrategy because you agree with their strategy. With the CBDC, there should be the freedom of options. They can very easily come along and say, risk disclosures are now mandatory specifically for stablecoins. If you're dealing in a stablecoin, you may be working with a shadowy supercoder that may not have your best self-interest, and you may have a run on the banks, blah, 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 blah. If these things were truly happening for the concern and for the safety of the user, we would be hearing a much different dialogue. But I don't blame the governments for being exactly what they are. I blame us for not having tighter scrutiny against it. We as a market should be unified in understanding that if we want stablecoins, we should have them. If it was illegal, they should never be on the market to begin with. There should not be regulation provided to something if they don't think they should be allowed to exist. And yanking the rug is the thing that causes the problem. So why are the cryptocurrency enthusiasts and economists suggesting instead that we operate crypto much more like the banking world? And that eventually we're going to be looking at ETF exposure, where you can use your regular cash to have exposure to funds that are backed by assets from somebody else, which is not at all the idea of owning your own money for your own purposes, which is what cryptocurrency is supposed to be about. Why the confidence in unstable stablecoins that lose value, that are not backed by anything, in trade for stablecoins that are backed one for that asset? And the only argument that I see against that is if the comparable value assets, if there's something one for one that is a comparable value asset, that people don't automatically know what those assets are. And if so, they should move out of that coin into something they have more confidence in, which brings us to our next issue. I'm looking at this from a US-centric standpoint, but we're going to see it more in the EU. We're going to see it more in individual countries. We're going to see it more in Malaysia and lots of different places. which is that the platform is forced by their governments to place further and further limitations on what activity people can take part in inside the crypto sphere. My issue is with the lack of clarity, the intentional, ongoing lack of clarity in place of rules that we can all say, here's what the rules are, go play. Why is that disclosure something that must resemble the traditional banking world's most unsuccessful models? I will give an example because once again, I told you that this is about my commentary about where we are in the world historically. Robinhood just went public. You can buy and sell Robinhood stock. Coinbase just went public a few months ago. You can buy stock in Coinbase. Whenever there is a huge jump in the volume of buying or selling a cryptocurrency, Coinbase and Robinhood are notorious for having, in quotes, technical issues with volume. Whether it's the case or not, you have two different problems. They've been around for years. They're ginormous. And if they're actually having technical issues, shame on them for not getting themselves up to scale where they need to be. There's no excuse for that. They're making billions of dollars off of people trading cryptocurrencies. Second of all, if it is a cover story, why isn't that the thing that's being investigated? These platforms need to be held to whatever values or standards they're supposed to be held to. When there is a pump and dump scheme on something like GameStop stock, or what was it, AMC, people have had their ability to trade frozen right in the midst of when they needed to sell. It is notorious that the markets are manipulated in this way. It was rumored that calls were made from some shadowy source somewhere telling places like Webull and Robinhood. And I throw Webull in there because nobody came down on them for doing exactly the same thing as Robinhood. But they all got the same idea at the same time. Was an email issued? Was a phone call made for them to freeze the market? Okay, well, where is the regulation in the traditional investment sector that is supposed to protect the amateurs that don't understand pump and dumps, and that when they're being told it's going to go up forever, buy, they don't understand that they are the pump. They're the ones providing the volume and the liquidity and the market buys that force the price up while the experts sell at the top. Once the sell orders go through, the value goes down and there's nobody to sell it to at those prices. I don't want more regulation. What I think is plenty is, okay, pump and dump schemes are not allowed. Okay, fine. So when one happens, identify it, go after the players. They're not supposed to do that. But then we have Elon Musk, who openly says, I pump, but I don't dump. I have no problem using my influence to manipulate markets in one direction, but it's none of your business whether I'm actually selling the asset on the other side. Not to get off the topic, but the hypocrisy of the suggestion that we need more and more and more clamping down on laws. If you tell us the rules to the game, we can play. If you're always threatening to change the rules, then at minimum, every 2 years, every 4 years, we're going to expect somebody new to come along that wants to change the root of power and control into something else, to divert the rules so that our assets and their value suffer. There was a many years old case against Ripple and their XRP coin, and they had already been classified as being something other than a security. Suddenly, the SEC files a new suit against them, and they were just starting to see their market activity start to prosper for the first time again. The timing was coordinated. It was an intentional manipulative act against the value of the coin. And I don't even trade XRP. I haven't for a while. I do support their right to operate the way that they do. And if there have been fundamental proof of their acting as a security, then the thing to do is to offer them the right to register as one and to make good on whatever they think they should have changed in that time. What I see is that history being used as a weapon, regulatory threats being used as a weapon, convincing people inside of crypto that the crypto world should have the same imbalances, inconsistencies, and inefficiencies as the regular banking world. Meanwhile, anybody that wants me to prove my case should simply ask me what it's like using stablecoins in and out since 2017. The answer is it works. It works instantly. They go to and fro where they need to, And I don't know of any instances from anybody around me. Maybe there's somebody out there that claims on a Reddit post somewhere that they didn't get their Tether or it didn't go where it's supposed to go or whatever the case may be. Otherwise, I do not see the use case that something like a hated and not trusted central bank digital currency resolves anything that doesn't work 10 times better without surveillance in stablecoins. The government can have all of the data that they want through the IRS and other agencies that are used as a weapon against us, a weapon against freedom, not having anything to do with money laundering or any other legal activity, but so that they can know everything about our activities as citizens who are playing by the rules, living by the laws. There is no use case beyond making the actual digital coin itself an operative against us to spy on our daily economic activities. When you know how somebody is spending, you know whether they are a friend or an enemy of the state and its thinking. There is a dual code concern that it is already stated that the CBDC is meant to align with clampdowns on what we do with our health. In fact, it is very likely that we'll be looking at a biotech-centric coin in the years to come, that we're required to disclose the condition of our bodies internally in a way that transacts with the rest of society. And I'm going to leave that at that because it's technology that I am 100% confident that I'm speaking the truth about, but people are not ready to hear about. So I'm going to leave this within the confines of the government is intentionally misrepresenting history and manipulating this story to where the world outside of crypto, they're going to believe the non-threatening version of the government's story. They're going to look back and realize that there has never been a level of tyranny and what in Hitler's time was called a technocracy, the desire for thousands, if not hundreds of points of data about every single thing that a person does. We're not going to hear the threatening version of that and the implications. We're going to simply hear that you want the government to be the one to trust, not these shadowy supercoders and their stablecoins. And that is the story for today. I hope that you will like and share. I hope that you'll subscribe. Please enter comments in the comment section. Let's get the dialogue going. Let Crypto Gordon Freeman be the guy that's to blame for getting people knowledgeable and organized about we the people type movements so that I can get somewhere before YouTube bans me. So on that note, a very skeptical, sometimes realistic and hopeful Crypto Gordon Freeman out.